In front of 200 guests, they laughed when her sister-in-law called her a fat pig. Her husband stood silent. Her mother-in-law only whispered, "Don't make a scene." Every gaze turned toward her. Everyone thought she would cry. She would bow her head. She would stay silent, like she had for the past 15 years. But she didn't. She set down her glass, stepped into the light, and lifted her chin. In that glittering room, the music stopped. The laughter faded. And, with just one sentence, the entire family that had mocked her became the ones to pity. The woman they called useless, redundant, a leech, turned out to be the one who had quietly carried their entire empire on her shoulders. That night, America didn't see a humiliated wife. It witnessed the rise of a woman no one could ever push down again. Have you ever felt that way? Looked down on, stepped over, until you almost believed their lies about you? If you have, you'll understand the power of this moment. The moment a fragile woman stands up and makes the whole world listen. Don't look away, because what happens next will change everything. And before we continue, hit subscribe, because your support keeps stories like this alive. Years before that ruined wedding night, Simone was not yet the woman who stood in silence. She was younger, hopeful, and wide-eyed when she first met Derek. He walked into her life with the charm of a storybook prince. His smile was practiced, his words coated in honey. He told her she was different, special, the one he had been waiting for. Their first dates felt like magic. Flowers left on her doorstep, long dinners under candlelight, promises whispered as though the world itself bent around them. When they walked into a room, people noticed. Derek held her hand proudly, introducing her as though she were his greatest treasure. For Simone, it felt like a dream she had never dared to dream. He knew how to perform in front of others. Compliments rolled off his tongue, the kind that made her blush and believe. She thought she had finally found safety. She thought this was love, but behind that perfect smile was something darker. In the beginning, she could not see it. She only saw the man who promised her forever, and she chose to believe him. Time moved quickly. Soon, Simone was the wife everyone envied. Derek played his part perfectly. At parties, he would pull her close, raise his glass, and declare, "She's the reason I'm a better man." Guests clapped. Women smiled at her with envy. To the outside world, he looked devoted, grateful, loving. But once the lights dimmed, the mask slipped. The words of praise disappeared. In their place came whispers of criticism. "Why would you wear that color? It makes you look cheap. You talk too much. People don't like loud women. You should be thankful I chose you." At first, she laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. She tried harder, changed her clothes, softened her voice, worked to please him. She wanted the world to see the love she thought she had. She wanted to hold on to the dream. Every morning, he was charming again. Every evening, the cracks showed. Compliments in public, cold eyes in private. Derek knew how to shine where people were watching, and he knew how to diminish her where no one else could see. Simone did not realize it then, but the man she had married was already building a cage. The cage grew invisible at first. Derek did not raise his voice. He did not slam doors. Instead, he drew invisible lines and expected her never to cross them. "Don't laugh too loudly. It isn't elegant. Don't meet with those old friends. They're beneath you now. Don't wear that dress. It makes you look desperate." Each word was sharp enough to cut, yet soft enough to pass as advice. Simone obeyed at first. She wanted to be the wife he wanted. She wanted to keep the peace. So she silenced her laughter. She avoided the people who had once been her comfort. She placed the dress back in her closet and chose another. But the air around her grew heavier. The walls of her life closed in. The woman who had once spoken freely, who had once dreamed without fear, began to shrink. And still, in front of the world, Derek was perfection. Smiling husband. Devoted partner. He played the role with ease. No one suspected the control he held behind the curtain. Simone began to feel something she had never known before. Not loneliness, not sadness, but suffocation. A slow tightening, as though her very breath was no longer her own. The cracks revealed themselves one evening in the simplest way. Derek returned home late, smelling faintly of cologne she had never worn. His shirt was half untucked. When Simone leaned in, her heart dropped. A faint smear of lipstick stained his collar. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Where were you?" Derek did not hesitate. He smirked. "A meeting. Why? Don't tell me you've become paranoid." He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and sank into the couch. Simone pressed again. The lipstick was too clear to ignore, but Derek's eyes were cold, steady. "Stop embarrassing yourself," he said flatly. "You imagine things. You always overthink. Maybe that's why people don't take you seriously." Gaslight. The word had not yet entered her mind, but the tactic was there. He flipped the blame onto her, made her doubt her own senses. She sat in silence, gripping the edge of her chair, torn between fury and shame. That night, she stared at the stain long after he had changed his shirt. It was the first undeniable sign, the first betrayal made visible. And yet, for reasons she could not name, Simone swallowed the truth and remained quiet. The lipstick had been only the beginning. Soon, the truth could no longer hide. One night, as Derek showered, Simone's eyes caught his phone screen. A string of messages lit up. Words from Vanessa. "Can't wait for tonight. You're mine, not hers." Her stomach twisted as she scrolled. There was no denying it now. When he stepped out, towel draped across his shoulders, she confronted him. Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned. "Vanessa, how long?" For a moment he looked startled. Then, just as quickly, his face hardened. He smirked. "So, what if it's true? You were easy to predict, easy to control." The words cut sharper than any betrayal. Not only unfaithful, but proud of it. To him, she was not a partner, not a wife. She was a convenience. Her chest tightened. The years of small humiliations, the rules, the cold nights, all led to this moment. She had given him love. He gave her cruelty. Simone turned away, her vision blurred. She no longer recognized the man she had once believed in. And yet, she knew now there was no saving this marriage. The mask had fallen completely. Derek did not leave quietly. He came armed with lawyers, contracts, and a family name that carried weight. In court, he looked polished, refined, convincing. Simone, with her trembling hands and tired eyes, looked fragile in comparison. He spoke with ease, painting himself as the stable, generous husband. She was painted as emotional, unstable, undeserving. The judge listened. The balance tilted against her. When the final papers were signed, Derek walked away with everything. The house, the car, the accounts. All hers were the clothes in her suitcase and a handful of personal belongings. Years of her life reduced to scraps. Simone stood outside the courthouse as Derek adjusted his tie, smiling for the cameras. His family surrounded him, proud, victorious. She walked alone to the street corner. The chill of the wind struck her face, reminding her she was now stripped bare. Money, status, even her dignity in the eyes of society, gone. He had crushed her in the place where he held the most power. For the first time, she saw the truth of the war she was in. It was not just about love, it was about survival. She found a room no bigger than a closet. The wallpaper was peeling, the mattress sagged, and the window barely closed. Still, it was hers. She placed her single suitcase against the wall and sat on the thin bed, silence pressing in. Tears blurred her sight, but exhaustion kept them from falling. She reached for a scrap of paper from her bag, uncapped a pen, and wrote the words slowly. Not all that glitters is gold. It was all she had to give herself. Reminder, warning, promise. Each night was quiet, too quiet. She would lie awake, hearing her thoughts echo in the small room. The past taunted her. The laughter, the betrayal, the courtroom. She replayed Derek's words, over and over. Easy to control. Her chest burned with shame, but deep inside, something else stirred. Anger. Not wild, but steady. A pulse that told her she had survived the worst. This room was not a prison. It was a beginning. From the ashes of humiliation, she would rise. She did not know how or when, but she would. For the first time in months, Simone closed her eyes and allowed herself to breathe. If the courtroom had taken her possessions, society took her worth. Friends who once called now stayed silent. Invitations stopped arriving. Her name was whispered in pity, in scorn. She lost him. He was too good for her. She'll never recover. Every glance seemed sharp. At the grocery store, two women turned their heads, then snickered softly. Old colleagues avoided her eye, embarrassed to speak to the fallen wife. Her phone sat on the table, silent. Not one message to ask how she was. Not one voice to comfort her. The world had chosen its side. Derek was still charming, wealthy, respected. She was the discarded one. The loneliness was suffocating. Not just being alone in a room, but erased from belonging. As if her very existence no longer mattered. Simone walked the streets with her head low. At night, she returned to her tiny room, hearing only the echo of her breath. The world had decided she was finished. They had written her ending without asking. But deep inside, a question remained. Did she have the right to fight back? Did she still have the right to live her own story? One evening, Simone sat by the window, the city lights blinking faintly in the distance. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, wounded, but alive. She whispered to herself, the words trembling at first, then firm. He humiliated me in public. He stripped me bare before the world. But this is not my ending. The vow was not shouted. It was not written. It lived only in her chest, quiet but unbreakable. She would not fight Derek in his arena, not yet. She would not beg for recognition from the friends who had abandoned her. She would rise in silence. She would build again, and when the time came, the truth would speak louder than revenge. Her hand pressed against the window pane, as if touching the horizon itself. She felt the pulse of her own heartbeat, steady, insistent. Simone had been underestimated. She had been dismissed, discarded, erased. But she was still here. The world believed she was finished. Derek believed he had won. But in that small, dim room, a woman quietly promised herself something greater. Her story was not over. It was only just beginning. After her silent vow, Simone began to move. The path was not glorious. It started with odd jobs that paid little but kept her alive. She worked mornings as a waitress, balancing trays while ignoring rude customers. In the evenings, she answered phones at a small call center, her voice polite, steady, while her spirit fought exhaustion. When the world slept, she opened her laptop. Online courses became her escape, her education, her plan. She studied business management, event planning, and finance. Each night, her eyes grew heavy, but her pen kept moving. Notes filled the pages. Ideas, strategies, dreams. Her body ached, but her mind sharpened. She knew she had to start from the bottom, brick by brick. Nothing came quickly, but every small effort built upon the last. She earned enough to pay rent, enough to eat, enough to buy second-hand books, and with each passing day she felt the faint stir of hope. It was not a sudden victory. It was a slow climb. But for the first time since losing everything, Simone felt she was walking forward, not sinking. Her heart whispered what her lips did not yet dare to say. She was beginning again. The knowledge she gathered became action. Simone printed flyers at the local copy shop, simple black and white designs advertising event planning services. She walked door to door, pinning them on boards at cafes, handing them to shop owners who barely looked up. Most ignored her. A few tossed the paper aside. But one small bakery called. They needed help organizing a weekend opening. Simone accepted. She poured herself into the details. Decor, seating, music, timing. She treated the event as though it were a grand gala. On that day, the bakery was alive with customers. Music flowed, the decorations shone in their simplicity, and the owner smiled in relief. Word spread, not loudly, but quietly. People said, "She pays attention. She cares." Soon, another call came, then another. Small birthdays, church gatherings, local fundraisers. The money was little, but each success was a seed. Her reputation grew, not from ads, not from wealth, but from trust. Simone carried business cards in her pocket, handing them with quiet confidence. Every handshake mattered. Every smile built credibility. She was not yet powerful, but the foundation was forming, and for the first time in years, she was no longer invisible. People began to see her again. Her progress did not go unnoticed. At a charity dinner, she arrived to support a small client. Dressed in a modest gown, she carried herself with quiet dignity. But across the room, Derek spotted her. Surrounded by his circle, drink in hand, he laughed loud enough for others to hear. "She plays at being a businesswoman," he sneered. "Planning cupcakes and birthday parties. It's adorable, really. A hobby, not a career." Laughter rippled through his table. Heads turned toward Simone, some with pity, some with amusement. She felt the sting, sharp and familiar. The humiliation burned her skin. For a moment, her chest tightened, and old fears whispered, "He still controls the room. He still controls the story." But she steadied her breath. She had heard his mockery before. It was nothing new. Yet, in that instant, she realized something had changed. He mocked because he noticed. He mocked because her steps, though small, were real. Simone did not speak back that night. She did not need to. She let the words hang in the air, meaningless against her growing resolve. Mockery could not erase her work. The seeds she planted were already sprouting, and Derek could not stop them. The next event Simone organized was larger, an anniversary celebration for a respected community leader. Guests gathered, music filled the hall, and her careful planning showed in every detail. The night flowed seamlessly. As she managed the event, Derek appeared again, smirking in the corner. He could not resist. "Don't worry," he said in a low voice as he passed her. "This won't last. You're just playing dress-up. Everyone knows it." This time, Simone did not shrink. She turned to him, steady, her voice calm but firm. "Don't worry," she said, echoing his words. "I'm just getting started." Her reply was simple, but it carried weight. For the first time, she did not walk away in silence. She met him head-on, unshaken. The look on his face faltered. The smirk slipped for a fraction of a second. And in that moment, she felt a shift. The cage he had built was breaking. Simone moved through the rest of the evening with her head high. Every smile from a satisfied guest, every thank you whispered in her ear, was proof. She was no longer the woman who lived in his shadow. She was stepping into her own strength. Opportunity finally came. A local corporation reached out, asking her to plan a gala for their partners. It was bigger than anything she had done. High stakes, high expectations. She poured weeks into preparation, choosing vendors, designing the theme, rehearsing every step. The night of the event, the hall glittered. Music swelled, lights shone across elegant tables, and guests mingled with ease. Simone walked the floor quietly, checking each detail, smoothing every flaw. By the end of the night, the CEO approached her. A tall man with the sharp eyes, he extended his hand. "You have real talent," he said. "This was flawless. We'll be working with you again." Those words sank deep. They were more than praise. They were validation. Proof that she was no longer a hobbyist or a victim. She was a professional, building something with her own hands. Around the room, guests whispered her name with respect. Not as Derek's ex-wife, not as a fallen woman, but as Simone Cole, the woman who delivered excellence. She went home that night exhausted but proud. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile without doubt. Her climb was real, her worth undeniable, and she was only rising higher. Success brought new faces into Simone's life. At a community fundraiser she organized, she met David. He was not wealthy, not powerful, not flashy. He was a billionaire entrepreneur, yet different from any man she had met. Despite his wealth, he carried himself with humility, respect, and patience. When he spoke, he asked about her work, her journey, her thoughts, and, unlike others, he truly listened. There was no judgment in his voice, no hidden agenda. He did not see her as Derek's former wife, nor as a woman trying to prove herself. He saw her as Simone, a woman with strength, with vision, with worth. He admired her resilience, but never placed her on a pedestal. Instead, he treated her as an equal. When she shared her fears, he did not dismiss them. He nodded, acknowledged, and encouraged. His presence felt different from anything she had known before. Simone was cautious at first. She had learned how painful love could become. But the simplicity of his kindness wore down her walls. A gentle laugh, a patient silence, A question asked not to judge, but to understand. For the first time in years, she felt seen without performance. David did not try to fix her. He simply made space for her to be herself. Their bond deepened with time. Long walks became their rhythm. Over coffee, they spoke of dreams, not wounds. Still, the scars of her past lingered. One evening, she confessed, "I still hear his words, that I was weak, that I was nothing." David looked at her, steady and unflinching. "Then he was a fool," he said softly, because all he saw was what he wanted to control. He mistook kindness for weakness, but what I see is strength he never deserved. With all his wealth, he could have chosen anyone, but he chose her, not for status, but for strength. The words struck deep. She had waited years to hear them, though she had not known it. David never drowned her pain with empty promises. Instead, he reflected her truth back to her, showing her that pain did not define her. That strength had always been within her. She began to smile without guilt, to laugh without fear. The heaviness in her chest eased. For every cruel phrase Derek had once carved into her heart, David offered gentle truth. Healing did not arrive in one night, but day by day, in his presence, she felt whole again. With him, love was not a cage. Love was not control. With him, love was freedom. Simone's personal healing reflected in her work. The small events she once managed grew into contracts with corporations, charities, and high-profile clients. Her reputation for excellence spread. Soon, she signed a lease for a real office, bright walls, desks lined with folders, a small team of assistants ready to follow her vision. The logo of her company appeared on banners at events. Newspapers began to mention her name. A rising star in event management. A woman redefining elegance and detail. Each success built upon the last. Clients trusted her judgment. Employees admired her leadership. For Simone, this was more than business. It was proof that her resilience could turn into legacy. She remembered the tiny room where she once sat alone, writing notes by lamplight. Now she stood at the head of a growing team, guiding projects that touched hundreds of lives. There were still long nights, still mistakes to fix, still exhaustion. But now there was purpose. Her name no longer carried pity. It carried respect. Derek had once tried to erase her existence. Instead, she had built something undeniable. Simone was no longer surviving. She was thriving. One evening, David invited her to walk by the river. The air was cool, the water reflecting the lights of the city. They walked in silence until he stopped, turning to face her. He took her hands, his voice gentle but certain. "Simone, you have carried the weight of battles no one should endure, and you walked through fire without losing yourself. You deserve more than survival. You deserve joy. You deserve love that heals, not wounds. You deserve to be happy." From his pocket he pulled a small ring, not extravagant, not loud, simple, elegant, sincere. "Will you marry me?" he asked. Her heart pounded. She had once thought marriage was a prison, but here, standing with David, she saw something different. Partnership, respect, freedom. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded, whispering, "Yes." There was no applause, no cameras, no audience, only the quiet night, the soft sound of water, and two souls choosing each other. This proposal was not about status, it was not about appearances. It was about truth. The love she had found now was nothing like the love she had lost. This was love that honored her. News of Simone's engagement spread quickly. For most, it was a story of redemption, of a woman rising from ashes to rebuild her life. But for Derek, it was an insult. At a gala where both were present, whispers carried across the room. Derek, glass in hand, approached her with a smirk. "So, it's true," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "You're marrying a teacher? How noble. But remember this, Simone. No matter what you build, no matter who you marry, you'll always be the woman who lost me." The words dripped with arrogance. Guests nearby stiffened, unsure how to respond. Some looked at Simone with sympathy, others with curiosity. She felt the familiar sting, the humiliation he always tried to wield. But this time, it did not crush her. She stood straighter, her voice calm. The anger in his eyes betrayed him. He mocked because he could feel her slipping beyond his reach. For Derek, her new love was a threat. Her new success was a wound to his pride. And though he laughed, his laughter was hollow. Simone walked away, leaving him with his glass and his bitterness. For once, he was the one left behind. The tension between them lingered long after the gala. Derek's words echoed, cruel and arrogant. But Simone no longer trembled under them. At their next encounter, he leaned close, smirking with the same old confidence. "You'll never escape me," he whispered. Simone met his eyes, steady and unflinching. A faint smile touched her lips, calm but cutting. "And you'll always be the man who underestimated me." The line landed like a blade. Simple, precise. Derek froze for a moment, his smirk faltering. He had always relied on her silence, her retreat, her fear. But this time she did not turn away. This time she stood taller, her voice sharp with certainty. Around them, guests watched, curious, sensing the shift in power. Derek muttered something under his breath, but it carried no weight. Simone walked away, her heels steady against the floor. For the first time she felt no anger, no fear, only clarity. His grip on her life was broken. Her calmness spoke louder than rage ever could. She did not need to scream. She only needed to live. And in that moment, Derek knew he was losing the control he once believed was permanent. When the day finally arrived, Simone's wedding was nothing like the grand spectacle of her past. This time, it was smaller, filled only with people who loved her, people who wanted her happiness. The hall was decorated with warmth, not extravagance. Children laughed, friends embraced, music floated gently through the air. At the center stood Simone, radiant in a gown that reflected not wealth, but grace. Beside her, David smiled with quiet pride, his hand holding hers as though it was the only vow he needed to make. Every detail carried meaning. Every guest carried respect. There were no sharp eyes, no whispers of judgment, only joy, only sincerity. For Simone, this was more than a marriage. It was freedom. It was proof that she could be loved without conditions, without control, without fear. When she exchanged vows, her voice was steady. This time, she thought, it is not about survival. It is about living. The applause that followed was not just for the bride and groom. It was for the journey that had brought her here. A journey from humiliation to dignity, from erasure to existence, from silence to love. It was the wedding of her true self. But peace rarely lasted where Derek was concerned. The man who once lost her could not bear to watch her happiness. On that night, he returned. As guests laughed and glasses clinked, the doors opened with a thud. Derek staggered in, his steps uneven, the smell of liquor heavy on his breath. His tie hung loose, his eyes wild. Conversations stilled. Guests turned, uncertain, uneasy. Whispers spread like fire. "Is that him?" He laughed bitterly, waving a glass in the air. "So, this is the great love story?" His words slurred, dripping with jealousy. "A teacher, really? And you think you've risen above me?" Simone's chest tightened, not from fear, but from weary recognition. The shadow of her past had followed her into the most sacred of nights. David moved as if to intervene, but Simone placed a hand on his arm. She would not hide behind anyone. Not anymore. Derek's voice grew louder. The bitterness in his tone revealed his weakness, not his strength. The wedding that had begun in joy now stood on the edge of chaos. Derek was ready to humiliate her again, the way he always had. But this time she was no longer the same woman. The chaos came in one violent motion. Derek stumbled toward the center of the room, past the startled guests, and fixed his eyes on the towering cake. With a drunken grin, he lifted his arm and struck. The 5-tier cake crashed, frosting and fruit flying across the floor, staining linens and gowns. Gasps erupted. Some women screamed. Cameras flashed, capturing the spectacle. "Worthless!" Derek bellowed, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "You're nothing, nothing but a joke." He pointed at Simone, his words cutting like daggers. "You think this makes you better than me? You'll always be the same, always beneath me." The room froze in disbelief. What was meant to be a night of joy had become a stage for cruelty. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some turning away, some whispering in shock. All eyes fell on Simone. the bride whose gown was now spattered with cream and wine, whose night had been violated. It was the ultimate humiliation, a mirror of the past she thought she had escaped. But the woman who stood there was no longer broken. She would not cry, she would not collapse. Her answer was waiting, calm and sharp as steel. The hall held its breath. Guests braced for tears, for collapse, for the scene Derek so desperately wanted. But Simone did not tremble. She did not lower her gaze. She brushed the frosting from her sleeve, lifted her chin, and looked at him squarely. Her voice was steady, clear enough for all to hear. "Is that all?" she asked. "A cake?" The words sliced through the silence. No anger, no fear, only quiet strength. Derek blinked, thrown off balance. This was not the woman he had once controlled. He had expected a victim. Instead, he faced resilience. Around them, whispers spread. Some guests nodded, others watched in awe. The tide of the room shifted, power slipping from his grasp. Simone stepped forward, her gown stained but her spirit unbroken. "You've tried to ruin me for years, and every time you've only revealed yourself. Tonight is no different." Her calmness was louder than his rage, her dignity greater than his cruelty. The hall erupted, not in chaos but in support. The applause began softly, then grew. Derek stood surrounded, diminished by the very crowd he once commanded, and Simone, at last, stood unshaken in the face of her past. As Derek seethed, convinced his outburst had shattered her, a screen flickered to life behind him. Guests turned in surprise. Simone had prepared for this moment. The projector lit up, displaying clips of Derek over the years, slurring insults at dinners, sneering in bars, berating her in front of staff. His cruelty was no longer hidden. Every guest now saw the mask he wore fall apart. Laughter, scorn, venom, all captured on camera. Derek spun around, his face pale. "Turn that off!" he shouted, stumbling toward the screen. But the evidence played on, unrelenting. Whispers filled the hall. Guests who once admired him now stared in disgust. Every lie he had built crumbled under the weight of truth. Simone stood still, her hands folded. She had no need to scream. The images spoke for her. The humiliation he had tried to pin on her now clung to him. And, for the first time, the crowd saw Derek not as a man of charm, but as a fraud, exposed in the harshest light. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth. The screen faded, but the silence did not lift. Simone raised her hand. A lawyer stepped forward, holding folders thick with paper. "These," she said evenly, "are records. False reports, stolen funds, fraud hidden under his family name." Gasps erupted. The lawyer opened the files displaying charts, signatures, proof undeniable. Years of manipulation, money siphoned, reputations bought. And then Vanessa stepped from the crowd. Her face pale, her voice trembling but clear. "He lied to me too," she said. "Promised me everything, gave me nothing. He used me, the same way he used her, the same way he uses everyone." The betrayal rang loud. Derek's last defense cracked. Guests murmured, horrified. Men he had called allies stepped back. Women who once smiled at him turned their faces away. The mask of wealth and honor no longer protected him. The truth was not only about Simone, it was about the empire he had built on deceit. Derek staggered, his drink spilling onto the floor. For the first time, he had no words. Simone did not gloat. She did not need to. The truth itself was the weapon, and it had struck with finality. The weight of silence pressed down on Derek as he looked around the hall. Where there had once been friends, allies, admirers, now there were only cold stares. "Listen," he tried, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. They're lying." But no one moved to his side. His business partner shook his head. An old friend stepped back. Even his family lowered their gaze, unwilling to defend him. Then came the sound. Firm footsteps across the marble floor. 2 police officers entered, badges gleaming. They walked straight toward Derek. "You're under arrest," one said, taking his arm. The crowd watched as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. He struggled, shouting, "This isn't over! I built everything!" But his words echoed hollow in the hall. No one answered. As he was led away, cameras flashed again, not in admiration, but in disgrace. Simone stood in silence, watching. She felt no triumph, only release. The years of humiliation, the lies, the control, finally ended in front of the very people who once believed him. The villain had collapsed, undone not by rage but by truth. The hall was quiet after Derek's removal, the air heavy with shock. Guests shifted, uncertain if the night could go on. Then Simone lifted her glass. Her gown still bore the stains of the cake, but her eyes shone with strength. Her voice carried across the hall. "He did not destroy my happiness tonight," she said. "He destroyed only his mask. The lies he built could not last. But what I have now, this love, this life, cannot be taken." The guests erupted in applause. Relief rippled through the room, followed by joy. Music returned, soft at first, then strong. People laughed, embraced, and danced again. Simone turned to David, her hand in his. The chaos had not stolen their vows. It had only made them stronger. For the first time in years, she felt light. Not because Derek was gone, but because she was finally free to live without his shadow. The wedding resumed, not as a performance for status, but as a celebration of truth. The night that began with humiliation ended with dignity. And Simone, once silenced, now stood as her own. The story of Simone was not just about betrayal. It was about transformation. From a woman dismissed, controlled, erased, she rose to build her own life, her own worth. She turned pain into power. She turned silence into strength. And in the end, she proved that revenge does not always mean destruction. Sometimes it means shining so brightly that lies cannot survive in your light. Her journey spoke to every woman who has ever been underestimated, every soul told they were nothing. Simone's life became proof. You are not defined by what they tried to take from you. You are defined by what you choose to build afterward. If you have ever felt invisible, the narrator closes, remember this. You deserve to share your story, because together we will keep telling the journeys of women who rise from shadows into light. Subscribe and never miss the next voice that refuses to be silenced. The story ends not in bitterness, but in hope, because Simone's victory is for all of us.